What is up everyone, your neighborhood chicken man here. This video will be a multifaceted guide regarding the intricacies of Super Sodam, otherwise known as HTPD, and my personal checklist on what I do as a fighter luster. I will go through a lot of technical details in this video and it will be a rather long one, so feel free to whip out your pen, paper, and some popcorn while I unveil to the world my very own approach as a fighter luster to Super Sodam. I will note that this video may be relatively controversial because some of the content in this guide may not align with other fighter luster or fighter hunter mains, but I will point out that this is, rather in its own way, a personal journal of how my thought process goes regarding preparation, plan and method of action, reaction responses, and above all, and not limiting to, everything I know about Super Sodam, which will accidentally make this video a technically advanced guide on Super Sodam from a fighter luster's perspective. Do note that I will not be going over the basics of fighter luster since there are other people in the community who has done a lot of work making guides about it, so feel free to check them out by googling them or looking through PSO2 Fleet Discord. However, I do believe that to those who are aspiring fighter lusters, I think they could take a thing or two from this video. To those that are watching who are not fighter luster mains, don't fret. I think this video will be somewhat fruitful as some of the details that I will be sharing will be applicable to whatever class that you play with, albeit with a few subtle yet significant differences, to which it should also provide sufficient material for non-fighter luster mains the ability and capability to formulate and theorize optimal participation in terms of DPS. It will be up to the viewer how they utilize such details to a playstyle that fits them best and juggle the decision of how much DPS they really want to push for. If you have any questions, feel free to just ask yo. First and foremost, the skill tree. Fighter skill tree, which is in the link in the description below, is relatively straightforward. Do note that this skill tree is not mine, but it is the skill tree of Rina, who is arguably one of the best fighters in the world. Shoutouts to Rina, since I'm also using their skill tree. Secondly, I will go over the gear that I utilize for this fight. Starting with Double Saber, I personally use two sets of double sabers for each, a run without Gelin and a run with Gelin. For runs with Gelin, I have a DS with Guardian Soul, Ripper Light, and Phrase Decay, which is used for the first and last phase of Super Sodam. Additionally, I have a DS with Guardian Soul, Grand Power, and Phrase Decay, which is used for the second phase, third phase, and Light and Dark phase. For runs without Gelin, I have a DS with Guardian Soul, Ripper Light, and Phrase Weak, which is used for the first and last phase of Super Sodam. And of course, I also have a DS with Guardian Soul, Grand Power, and Mark Angar, which is used for the second phase, third phase, and Light and Dark phase. Obviously, you can replace Mark Angar with Mana Reverie, as it gives not only 50 attack, but it additionally adds some HP and PP. I got lazy and I just used Mark Angar. The second weapon I utilize for this fight is Knuckles. I have separate sets for with Gelin and without Gelin runs, but the Knuckles are pretty much only used for utilizing Fatal Knockout, which is a CPA that is given to fighter. I will talk more about this later on. Third weapon that I use in this fight is Pride of Byakko. This twin dagger's purpose is for some chase situations and short mid-distance voltage upkeep. I will talk more about this later on. The fourth weapon that I use for this fight is the Pride of Suzaku. This dual blade's purpose is for long distance voltage upkeep when utilizing weapon action while manual aiming. Of course, you can utilize other dual blades that are equipable for fighter and use the weapon action in order to upkeep voltage for long distance scenarios as well. I will talk more about this later on. The fifth weapon I utilize is the Gun Slash. This is for certain prep situations, most notably on phase 1, where you can utilize a teleport skip while doing a charged aiming shot, otherwise known as aimed shot in NA, in order to dish out some juicy damage. I will talk more about this later on. And the sixth and the last weapon I utilize is Sign Burn. This is only used during the loading scene between phase 1 and 2. This gives a good chunk of damage from the get-go on phase 2 and it's pretty nifty. However, due to how NA is structured, Sign Burn is extremely rare and expensive because it is locked behind trigger quests that no longer exist right now, except to those who saved those triggers from back in the day that contains Sign Burn as a drop. I will show you how I use this during the fight. For your units, aside from having God fixes on all of them, I personally use the XQ units, particularly the neighbor units, since they provide the most S attack damage compared to all other combinations. The good thing is you don't need to have everything named as neighbor. You don't need the rear as the neighbor unit, because as long as it's part of the unit set of 13 stars that provides set bonuses, you can mix and match however you want, as long as the arms and the legs are neighbor, since they provide the S attack bonus in terms of DPS. The rear unit, otherwise known as the back unit, you can pretty much utilize whatever and they all give the same stat. If anything, you can still rock triple Crass if you want, or you can mix Crass rear with Crass and Atlas arms with another Crass if you want, or you could just do Crass Atlas Atlas should you wish. Completely your choice. I just find the neighbor unit set giving a slight edge in terms of S attack damage since I am a DPS freak. The rings that I personally use are Jumping Dodge, which is otherwise known as Leaping Dodge, Atomizer Lovers, otherwise known as Atomizer Fanatic, and the Kamaitachi Combo Ring, which is otherwise known as the Whirlwind and Pursuit Support. Additionally, I also use Slow Fighter and Perfectionist rings. For the SSAs, I use the following. For the S6, I use the Crit S6. S7, I use Crit S7, and S8 is the S Attack S8. For the DS, I personally use the S1 Pedal, followed by S2, S3, and S4 Crit, and S5 Counter. The reason why I use this particular setup is because mathematically speaking, you will have 100% crit when you have 500 vaults, and if you have Techer buff, 100 crit rate regardless of voltage. I personally found this particular setup the most rewarding in terms of DPS from my personal observation, but there may be others who find a much more optimal DPS setup or just outright higher DPS in this, and if so, please let me know. I'm open to all opinions, even the wrong ones, since my playstyle evolves towards improvement every single day. One thing before we dive into the complex nature of Sodam is the concept of TAJA. TAJA occurs when you utilize one PA that is different with the next, in which the next PA that is executed properly will yield extra DPS. If you use a strong PA in the beginning, you will miss out on some damage, so when you have some prep time, try to get into a habit of utilizing a prep PA in order to maximize DPS output. You will see this throughout my gameplay. Now I will go over briefly the PAs that I use for Super Sodam. Tornado Dance, especially Type 0, is a short repositioning or mid-distance movement PA. This PA can do DPS and in certain scenarios achieve effective repositioning. This PA helps reposition you and also help you with preparing TAJA, so be mindful of this. Scissor Slash is a quick PA that is done in a stationary position. This PA boasts a good amount of DPS, and with only 62 frames, it can help with quick DPS. Rumbling Moon is a short PA that does both DPS and repositioning. The repositioning is rather short distance, so this will be utilized for rotation DPS and subtle repositioning. This move takes about 74 frames and it cannot instantly weapon action at the time of activation, so do bear in mind. Illusion Flurry is a long PA that boasts a good amount of DPS. It has a quick startup and one of the few PAs where you can instantly utilize weapon action in order to counter immediately. Generally, this PA will lose potential DPS if you don't let the PA completely finish. Do note that this PA lasts for about 153 frames. Lure Strike is a PA that is extremely situational, in which it does a quick stab, and if this PA makes into contact with an enemy, the quick stab converts into a downwards dunk. Not ideal for DPS, but I personally use this for preparing TAJA if my positioning does not require adjustment. Waylay Drop is a PA that lunges the body forward as if you were a volleyball player about to strike down. Do note that the traveling distance is not at its maximum if you're not manual aiming. I personally do not use this for DPS, but I use this for repositioning if I have Crasspod activated. Turbine Toss is a PA that tosses your DS like a boomerang Beyblade in front of you. It does good DPS if charged, but most of the time I personally don't use this during my rotation, except when I have time to charge. Acro is a PA that not only provides guard frames when timed properly, it also allows your character to gain some additional height in the air. I sometimes use this if I feel that my height is not optimal and I don't want to drop down and jump up to set up my height. Type 0 Baleful Circle is a PA that provides you with a 360 protection during the duration of the PA. When charged, it increases some DPS and provides protection as well as the uncharged variation, which also provides protection. If you're in a pinch and you see an attack that is coming but you do not know how to counter it or not enough time to prepare for it, just use this to keep you safe. Chaos Riser is a PA that is usually a mobbing tool. It has a pull effect and dishes a strong hit with it. I do not use this often unless I am breaking the gildings in the last phase of Super Sodam, and oftentimes this can be risky as it also consumes all of your gear. Having no gear means you will not be able to counter unless you fill at least 1/3 of the DS gear, so do bear this in mind. Last but not least, Hurricane Sender is a PA that throws a little arrow-like tornado in front of you. This PA can do a bit of damage on impact, but at the cost of 1 DS gear, you can get additional damage from the marked spot. I recently started utilizing this more as I think that there is some potential to utilizing this for the fighter rotation. Unfortunately, I do not have sufficient data to support this, but rather this is just an instinct that I have with this PA's DPS potential. However, this PA does have its use, especially in the last phase of Super Sodam, where you have enough prep time to TAJA and send out Hurricane Sender in order to take advantage of weapon action, which is used to detonate it, and since you are mid-weapon action, you're also able to counter for additional DPS. The other weapons that I'll be using for fighter for this particular fight is the Twin Daggers, which particularly utilizes the PA called Raging Waltz. This particular PA allows you, where if you're at quite a distance, you can actually chase them like so. You can of course utilize any movement in addition to that to adjust your repositioning post the ending of the PA. Do note that this I personally use on certain instances where you have to chase Sodam kind of high up, and it can help pretty well after you implement this particular use and then just swap your weapon in order to provide yourself with a DPS scenario. Of course, the other instance to the reason why I use this particular TD of the Pride of Byaku is because it has this as well. As long as your reticle is able to reach the enemy, you will be able to hit the enemy, which helps you with voltage upkeep. The other is the one that I told before regarding the dual blades, especially all class or fighter equipable. The good thing about dual blades is that you can be all the way at the opposite side of the map and you will still be able to hit Sodam, provided that you are aiming correctly. Do note that if you want to shoot multiple bullets in quick succession, you have to avoid being grounded, because if you are grounded, you will be in a situation that you have to force using dodge, and if you try to mash, you will not be able to mash that quickly. And sometimes when you mash, repositioning can be hard because your reticle is locked on a vertical position and not horizontal. So to remedy this, obviously you have to be in midair and make sure that you have at least one extra jump available so that you can do something like this. And then you can just adjust as how you wish it. Best thing about this is that when you're moving, obviously with the movement and the weapon action, you are able to free aim however you want. Ideally, you do not want to do standing like so, or stationary weapon action, because you're going to get stuck just doing vertical aiming, and instead you can benefit from horizontal aiming. The other thing that I use, especially in Super Sodam for knuckles specifically, is Fatal Knockout. Fatal Knockout being the CPA, where if you see the 5 indicator on my sub palette, it has 6 stocks because I was able to do all the quests necessary in order to obtain 6 stocks. Fatal Knockout is a fighter exclusive knuckle CPA where you utilize 3 stocks of the CPA in order to dish a particular thing like this. Of course, this does some heavy DPS, which is always beneficial, and you can store up to 2 because you have a max of 6. And additionally, it is also counterable. You can actually set yourself up where the initial part of the 2 hit on the startup position of the CPA, you can have a counter available. Make sure that the attack that reaches you is right before your first knuckles come out. Otherwise, if you are too late or you have activated a little bit too early, you will not be able to get a counter, which renders yourself completely invulnerable. So obviously getting the counter is highly beneficial for you. Of course, there's also Signburn. Signburn being the rare weapon that not a lot of people will have access to. The particular niche about this weapon is that you have to let it out on your hand for 30 seconds. After 20 or so seconds, your body, especially the center portion around your waist or where the location of the weapon is, it will start glowing like so. And once it starts glowing, this is where you can anticipate when it's about to be ready, which is right now. Now that we have flashing ray of light, all we have to do is make yourself that you pair with a chase up so that on phase 2 of startup, you're able to chase Sodam when he goes all the way up there, and press normal like so. Once you do normal, then it will emit an explosion called the Golden Dragon's Eruption, otherwise known as Van Halen because Van Halen made eruption. And after that, you simply swap back to your DS and start doing your DPS rotation. Do note that this is not a repeatable explosion for Signburn. Once you use it, you can only do 1 damage on everything that you do. So do not use this. Again, it's a one-time use thing. Moving forward, now the drink selection. A lot of people, obviously those who are uncomfortable doing Super Sodam, they tend to go for HP drink, particularly the premium HP drink, just because they get extra HP. But in the instance for this particular video, we'll be going towards more DPS. Best choice is obviously the random drink, especially if you have premium, get the random drink. Try to get the one that provides a sub effect of weak damage, because overall having weak damage is just in general beneficial, especially this one, weak point damage up. This is the one that you want to go for, ideally in order to dish out the most damage. There, of course, you can try to go for the shifted premium, which gives you not only damage, but it also gives you efficient PP utilization. So to those who are not that comfortable with PP management, which oftentimes you will find yourself struggling with the weak drink, you can just simply use shifted drink and you will be fine. The RDR boost that it provides as well can be fruitful, but since we have permanent PSO2 day boosts, it doesn't really benefit that much. So whether or not you have RDR or not, you're still going to get some good stuffs when you clear Super Sodam. The other thing, of course, is in order to prepare yourself for the fight, ideally you will want to have a couple of things. Stir fry being one and sold in the Visiphone shop, or you can personally go out there and harvest them utilizing red meat that you get from explorations, coast olives that you can get from coast, and ruins grape, and just simply go to Franca's and make stir fry. This provides really good DPS additionally because it boasts a good stat as well as additional HP, although it's only 50, but hey, more HP the better, especially for survivability. The other, which might take some time, is the miracle rations, which is utilized when you do particular quests with partners. Especially, I personally use the successor classes when it comes to the partner up for that particular situation. Of course, I'm not unable to choose here, but if I were to go here, I would go for Stratos, Kyokuya, and Lukot and just continuously utilize them as often as you can on every single quest that you do. You can of course spam Zaudan 50 billion times and eventually get the green nonchalant face into a red happy smiley face and make sure that the bar turns red. Once this bar turns red to the right and you keep on filling it and filling it and filling it, you eventually will start getting Stratos and Kyokuya and Lukot. When you go out to the lobby, you'll be able to pick up miracle rations from them. And having miracle rations, an extra 30 damage, always beneficial. Now that I've gone pretty much the entirety of what I do in anticipation of the fight, we will now begin with a much deeper analysis of the fight itself. We now begin with the beginning portion of this fight, which involves a couple of things: a understanding of what kind of classes you have in your party, and additionally, who will be the one who will start. The rest of the other players in the party should be going towards the camp ship so that they're able to do the cutscene skip at the very beginning. Once the notifications, particularly when Matoy says that they've become a great light to drive away the darkness once and for all, that gives you a couple of seconds to really ready yourself for this battle. I immediately start putting my limit break on, which allows me to maximize fighter damage, and once the notification that shows up right there on the bottom that says preparation complete, commencing battle, that is when I start jumping down. Alright, now that we go down, we'll begin with a setup where I just go down here, and you have to be obviously very familiar with what kind of moves you can anticipate here. Right here, the first attack commences with those three icicles that calm the ground. This particular icicle can be easily denoted by the three pulsations that Sodam does, especially with his eye. All you have to do is remember the timing that it comes out with those three pulses, and after the third pulse, that is where you start bringing your weapon action down as you're positioned pretty much close to the ground, relatively center, but slightly to the left. Once I see that indication right there, wait for 3 pulses and counter at the appropriate time. Once this indication shows up, Sodam is going to impart a little circle that tracks you at the last known position, and it's going to strike down lightning. All you have to do is wait for the circle to show up, and then approximately half a second later, you can press the weapon action in order to get the counter. This particular indication, you will be seeing the eyeball just commanding forth with a particular AoE circle. This is a particular tornado that allows you to counter multiple times. Just make sure that you watch very carefully the enclosing of the circle in order for you to maximize the counter timing, followed by another counter after that. Once the tornado comes out, There are instances where I try to counter and I also implement at that exact moment an illusion flurry just to add a little bit of DPS in between the second counter, which allows me to, on the next attack after the final counter, follow it with a scissor slash, rumbling moon, or any other PA that I wish for added DPS plus an added crit as well. Here's an example of how I personally execute it. There are instances where sometimes Sodam can be an absolute dick with the tornado and not show the entirety of the tornado like this. When that occurs, you can just simply continue your DPS rotation until you have your next move out. Sometimes Sodam will turn red and is going to utilize its core to just smack you from right to left. This particular attack burns, but you can easily counter the moment you start seeing the eye go from one side to the other, right, like so. So you can just counter and reap the damage from there. Sodam will not have a set logic regarding what kind of move it's going to utilize on this particular phase, especially in this part. So just make sure that you do not hard commit yourself with certain PAs and just adapt depending on what move they are going to do. So that should pretty much cover the initial part of phase 1. It is up to you whether or not you want to utilize Scissor, Rumbling Moon, Tornado even, Illusion Flurry, and Hurricane Sender should you wish, based on what kind of rotation you're comfortable with, to try to squeeze as much as you can and try to counter as much as you can with familiarity. Of course, as time goes on, you'll become much more proficient on this particular part of phase 1, and you can always try to mix and match what kind of theories you have in order to implement the highest DPS. Just make sure that you follow the basic rules of fighter with TAJA and you will succeed in DPS. Once that last eyeball is completed, you can utilize that brief moment of time to prep yourself with the gun slash. Make sure your gun slash is on shoot mode by pressing weapon action when your normals shoot bullets. Do a Streisvei followed by aimed shot into a TAJA in order for you to reap big damage. Once the teleport occurs, most of the time, Sodam will do a side-to-side blast or vomit or whatever you call it, and that is statistically relatively frequent if whoever has aggro tends to be at the edge and not in the center. Of course, this is not 100% proven because this is just anecdotal, but that is what my observation was. Sometimes Sodam will not start off with a side-to-swipe vomit. There will be moments where even Sodam will start vomiting while you're teleporting down and just get yourself screwed. It's just very different, and Sodam can just be a bitch at times. But regardless, make sure you're always on your toes whenever attacks come out. One thing to note on instances when Sodam does not do a side-to-swipe vomit, there is a very high chance that immediately after a different move that he does, or a couple moves thereafter, he will initiate a side-to-swipe vomit. Make sure you are well aware of that and that your position is close to a dash jump so that you don't get yourself absolutely screwed. And of course, in this particular instance, that does occur. The good thing is, even though you had to wait for the jump boost pad, you still have enough time to safely cross over and still be able to go to the other side and dish out some damage. Normally after the drop down teleport, I statistically anticipate that he'll do a left to right or right to left vomit. I shoot the shot and I immediately jump towards the other location. Start hitting Sodam, a quick 3-hit Scissor Slash Illusion Flurry followed by another Scissor Slash, and I immediately prep Tornado so I could already prep myself with an illusion so that the last hit of the illusion, which does the biggest damage on that one, pairs with it and connects with it, which yields pretty much good damage. Sometimes even after the beginning drop down, where Sodam does his usual rotation, At the point of the eyeball right here, if your party does a lot of damage, you might get to a point where the eyeball may not even allow you to give a little counter. And just like this, too much damage means the eyeball is just going to escape yourself and you will not be able to counter, which means less DPS in general. Once this eyeball sequence is done, I immediately start positioning myself with my twin daggers because I anticipate statistically that he will do this whale attack. I could immediately charge all the way up, fly up there, and start getting my counters ready because that is juicy damage, and finalize with another TD to make sure my voltage upkeep is there. And I just chase to this hand drop down. This hand drop down is statistically relatively high. Sodam may not always go for this, so be aware of that. When the eyeball comes out and you have enough time to counter it, just make sure that you pay attention to the closing circle of the eye, which is demarked by a white circle that concentrates and goes towards the center of the eye, just like that. Make sure you have a weapon action ready just to be able to counter that. Sometimes immediately after the eyeball, either on the right or the left, Sodam may not always go for a whale attack and will just try to go for a hand drop down. In this particular instance, I immediately, after the eyeball is done, I just swap to my TDs and just use jumping dodge so I could be able to just barely reach the hand that goes towards a shifting motion, and I upkeep my voltage, and that will give me enough time for me to drop down and connect my DPS rotation for the drop down. Of course, this drop down is, although statistically high, I try not to go hoping that's going to be a hand drop down because he can just follow it up with another whale attack like this. Do keep in mind that not all attacks will come into sequence, and there is a logic behind Sodam trying to do a whale attack in which the frequency is relatively defined in the game code, where it's not going to immediately follow it up with another whale attack or within 2 to 3 attacks thereof. There might be rare instances where the whale attack can come up twice, but that could also be due to server issues or connectivity issues based on whoever's in the party. Since PSO2 is a relatively worldwide game, sometimes the connection can just screw you. Sometimes Sodam will go for this particular attack where you have to be in the middle platform and it has a hand that's just barely reachable. Right before he does the headbutt or head slam or whatever it is, you can use your usual rotations, but once the hand sort of creeps forward, I start using other PAs that are not Illusion Flurry because for some reason Illusion Flurry does not have enough reach in order to dish out maximum DPS. You note that in this particular situation, I predominantly use Rumbling Moon, Scissor Slash, and Illusion Flurry right before the hand creeps forward. Once the hand creeps forward, I tend to just switch back and forth between Scissor, Rumbling Moon, sometimes Turbine, if I just want to. You might just get absolutely lucky and you have this situation where the eyeball just drops down. When the eyeball drops down, after the first initial rotation, be mindful that you don't have to worry about a quick DPS check where if you do too much damage, the eyeball is going to escape. In this situation, the moveset is pretty much predefined and will last all the way to the end unless there is server or connectivity issues, to which in this case, you can just reap as much DPS that you can considering the eyeball is a weak point. So counter away, get as much damage as you can. Of course, in a situation like this, I typically try to prep a TAJA Rumbling Moon for repositioning, Illusion Flurry, followed by a Hurricane Sender so that by the time I can sneak in one more attack, I can use the weapon action counter to detonate the Hurricane Sender and also reap the benefit of the counter as well. Sometimes Sodam will just do a whale attack while you're not in the optimal position. That is where you use your dual blades, manual aim, and just make sure that you're able to time the whale attack so you can dodge appropriately and just continue using this to upkeep your voltage. Sometimes in all platform locations, Sodam will have his hand placed like so, and he does a lunging attack. This lunging attack is relatively telegraphed, so you don't really have to worry about getting into a panic situation, but all you have to do is just recognize when the attack is going to come out. Whenever I see this move, the first thing I do, I go all the way to the front of the platform, and then I send a Hurricane Sender that's TAJA, followed by another PA so I could reap the reward of the counter and the Hurricane Sender explosion. Sometimes Sodam will do this move where they will place both hands on side lines of the map, and he will headbutt the center part of the stage. You can immediately drop down and try to recognize it early, but this is basically mostly based on reaction, and once you do, you can just drop down and just do as much DPS as you can. Positioning can be tricky because obviously you do not want to accidentally position yourself and then suddenly, boom, you're jumping on the next platform. So try to avoid using your movement WASD or your control stick at a time like this. Once you do sufficient enough damage, you can obviously split yourself up and be able to try to kill both of the eyeballs on this particular phase. And once you do, you'll be able to have access to the final part of the phase. This particular eyeball phase is very similar to the initial start of the quest. All the moves are relatively telegraphed, and there is no particular order on what they're going to use. After both sides have been broken, this is also another opportunity for you to switch to your gun slash, charge your aim shot after using Stride Spy in order to get TAJA bonus. You will teleport all the way down here. Here, Sodam does two moves. The spit attack, where you have one little hand on the side where you can do a lot of DPS, and the other attack is the one that he tries to climb up and uses hand smack to hit the center part of the stage. Whenever the eyeball immediately goes all the way up there, I immediately just tornado towards this side, which I do illusion flurry scissor and illusion. And once that occurs, I jumping dodge into pre-charge tornado dance so I could immediately reposition myself so I could try to do as much damage to the eyeball. Sometimes Sodam will do this. I sometimes use TD, or I just lock on to the eye and I send Hurricane Senders and I detonate them. I use Hurricane Sender because sometimes if I have Crash Pot, I do not want to waste the Crash Pot by swapping to a different weapon that is not Crash and I lose the bonus. Once you do sufficient enough damage, Sodam is going to immediately jump up all the way to the back. Once that occurs, I swap to Knuckles and I get my Fatal Knockout ready. Most of the time, unless you're on a very, very fast team, you should have 6 stocks, which means you should be able to utilize 2 complete Fatal Knockouts. I use the Fatal Knockouts here because I cannot for the life of me find in any way, shape, or form have the DS be able to bring out this much burst damage while Sodam is at an unreachable spot. Once this occurs, do the final DPS and then continue on with the second phase. The moment you're at the teleporter stage for second phase, I immediately have my Signburn ready. Since the teleporter takes about 30 seconds, and since Signburn takes about 30 seconds to completely charge for the Van Halen, obviously this is the right time to rock it. There are 3 characters, Matoi, Harriet, and Hitsugi. There is this weird thing where if everybody talks to one character and another character after that, there is a rather statistical tendency where the first character that you talk to will be the buff that will be given on last phase when you break all gildings on both hands. So do bear in mind which buff you want. Matoi will give you extra HP, damage, and whatnot. Hitsugi will give you a stunner, and Harriet will give you 10 million damage, if I'm not mistaken. Usually I go Hitsugi, but going Matoi doesn't hurt for those who wants extra HP at the final phase of Super Sodam. Once phase 2 is about to start, you should have your Van Halen, Signburn, Golden Dragon's Eruption ready. And while you are waiting for this cutscene to finish, there's one thing that you have to be mindful. Try not to dash in too early. Make sure Sodam is jumping and do a chaser. And once that chaser comes out, just make sure you press normal. And when you press normal, it'll blow up. You have an extra jump so you can swap to your DS and then just do your DPS rotation. Predominantly a DPS rotation like this, most of the time it's going to be Illusion, Rumbling, Scissor, and Hurricane Sender, just based on what kind of moves Sodam decides to push out. When phase 2 starts, just make sure that you execute the Signburn properly, and once that occurs, be mindful of what phase Sodam is going to go for. In a situation like this, Sodam can be part of any element that they want. There's no logic to it, and depending on what element is going to go for, that is where you're pretty much sealed in, and you have to deal with the attacks that are unique to some of those elements come out from. However, most of the time you're going to see a lot of usual stuff that you see, like for example a double swipe from right to left, which is usually a double counter situation, or it could be like a reach over grab and whatnot. It all depends on the phase, and it all depends on who has aggro. Starting with the wind phase, Sodam does a couple unique attacks on wind phase. One particular move that he does is the one that he sort of walks a little bit back and slowly moves a little bit forward. This particular move comes out with a total of 3 attacks. You have enough time to either reposition Rumbling Moon into position yourself so you can make sure that the counters hit the core. This is similar to the Tornado on the early parts of phase 1, where you can of course sneak in an Illusion Flurry in between those 2 counters to reap the most reward. Sometimes, if you have enough time, I send out a Hurricane Sender so I could reposition with Rumbling Moon, which allows me to double counter the Tornado setting, along with the Hurricane Sender detonation and repositional damage. Sometimes Sodam will go for the traditional double swipe, and that double swipe, believe it or not, is counterable twice. There is a trick to it which involves utilizing a weapon action just right there in order to activate the first counter, and right before Sodam is about to hit you on the way back, you have to press an additional weapon action followed by the weapon action in order to counter the second hit. In total, you have to successfully press 3 weapon actions in order to be able to pull off a double counter. This particular move is a staple of fighters DPS, and you have to be very mindful about this, because if you can pull this off, that's a good amount of DPS. Sometimes Sodam will do this particular move where Sodam does this little pull thing. Once that pull thing comes out, I immediately react to it and start charging Tornado. If you do it soon enough or not too late, you have enough time to charge a Tornado into a chase up all the way to Sodam's core and still be able to get off a counter from this. This, what if mastered properly, I think will help you out tremendously when it comes to chasing DPS on BS scenarios like those. So obviously, aside from the double counter here and an ice patch we can easily counter, sometimes Sodam is a bitch, hides all the way to the back, and when that occurs, I take the liberty of taking my Gunslash out, charge into Kablam, and get some juicy damage. Sometimes Sodam will be an additional prick level 9000. He might just do this stupid slam that he chases all the way front. As long as you are in the air, you will not get hit by the slam downs, especially if you're close to Sodam's core. So do not be afraid. As long as you're proficient with fighter, with keeping yourself in the air, you don't have to worry about nonsense like that. Although Sodam can be a bitch, sometimes we make do with what we have. Whenever you're in the lightning phase like this, all you have to do is make sure that Sodam faces towards the center. You don't have to worry about reach-ins that Sodam does, unlike Fire Phase where Sodam does reach-ins. You can try to react yourself in order to try to get all the counters as much as you can, but as long as that criteria of Sodam facing the center is met, you could keep them in the back and constantly do a lot of DPS. Once you're fighting a fire element or dual fire element, make sure that you are well aware and well versed with AI manipulation. AI manipulation is a very simple concept at first, but executing it can be quite a challenge because you have to be extremely familiar with how Sodam moves around. The basic logic of AI during this particular situation is, 1, Sodam will always face whoever has aggro, and whoever has aggro, Sodam will reposition its body. Secondly, Sodam has a number of moves that they can do when they're at the corner like this. They can either dash back, double swipe, jump up, icicles, or even a slam down fire with an AoE. You can manipulate Sodam and put him here pretty much indefinitely if you make sure that Sodam turns every once in a while. Make sure that there is no 2 sets of attacks that Sodam does where he is not turned, to which he will do a dash in, and if once he does a dash in, that will mess up the entire DPS rotation in the corner. You can sort of tell when Sodam has to turn around after he does a couple of the double swipe attacks. And when he does a couple of double swipe attacks, as long as you make him turn, he will do a small turn based on where you are located, and when that occurs, his movesets will return back to neutral position, and once the neutral position comes back, he will no longer do the dash and he will start on step 1. Sometimes when you fail the AI manipulation on the fire phase, particularly on the dual fire phase, Sodam is going to do something rather ridiculous. Sodam is going to hover over here. I immediately just start doing a little bit of damage with Limit Break on. I immediately use my TDs, Raging Vaults all the way up. And from here, if done properly, I'll swap to my DS, Illusion Flurry, and counter every other icicle that you see. Once every icicle has been countered, I drop down, double jump after I touch the ground, then I impart Fatal Knockout in order to do some damage. You can obviously find more information on how other top fighters do both the initial part of phase 2 as well as the double element phases. You can feel free to Google or YouTube and search those videos where you can pretty much take advantage of what all the other fighters do and just digest pretty much what they do. I already laid the foundational work earlier on this video, and with that knowledge, you should be able to pick up on the minor details that the other top players do. We will now begin talking about the light and dark phase, the phase where a lot of you may not have a complete understanding of, and where a lot of you will tend to die, or if not, provide minimal amounts of DPS. I will help you navigate these barriers and provide you with the education needed to not only be sufficiently comfortable with all of light and dark attacks, but to optimize your damage in order to pass this phase as swiftly as possible. Do note that this practice only makes permanence. If you practice like shit, you will make shit permanent, so we will do our best to avoid that. Just to refresh upon the basics for this phase, I made a video previously where you can watch and have a basic understanding of the attacks and the concepts such as attacks in this phase. Do note that I will discuss this phase mostly from a perspective of fighter luster and also from a perspective of someone who has aggro in this phase who is close up to Sodam. If someone else has aggro and they are in a mid-range damage dealer, some of the attacks that Sodam does will come out more frequently than someone who has aggro and when they are right in front of Sodam. Some of those attacks may be rather different than the others, so please bear in mind this. Most of the time, once Sodam enters light and dark phase, ideally I would start charging Gunslash, but sometimes I don't really feel like it because I'll rather just have my DS ready. With this particular move, it appears that Sodam has been being a bitch, and he just decided to fly all the way up and start shooting bullets of hail like Egypt. In this particular situation, I just run all the way up front in the hopes that none of the attacks would target me. Although sometimes it can, as long as you just continue one directional motion or one directional movement, you will be pretty much safe from this attack. Of course, I already tested multiple variations of this, and I also could not find an instance where I could actually hit Sodam up there. So don't try and attack Sodam here. So after this move occurs and Sodam drops down, most of the time Sodam will start doing the slow walk up. The ideal way to tackle this is obviously you stay safe at a distance and just target him, but if you are a baller, you can just be right in front of Sodam. Just make sure that you pay attention very closely to his footsteps. Every time he plants a foot, he lays down a particular black, dark, whatever floor, goo thing in the floor. That is counterable, especially the moment it comes out. Just make sure that you pay attention to his feet. And then once you do pay attention to his feet, then you should be able to counter, jump, dash, and counter again. As I mentioned before, just because Sodam does that does not necessarily mean that he will do a slow walk up. Sometimes he will mix it up and just start dancing around like the samba that he is. But sometimes he would sneak in an attack and then just start pulling through with a stupid walk up. So make sure you are able to react sufficiently to it and just have tornado dance ready in order for you to reposition yourself out of harm's way or to position yourself to do damage. Normally after he does a slow walk up, statistically he will start doing this circus laser. You can actually be at a safe position like this where you don't get hit by the circus lasers and still be able to maintain height without getting yourself dropped down by that little black pool. You can of course position yourself right in front of him so that you can do your usual rotation. Most of the time I just use jumping dodge with an illusion ray, and then by the time I start seeing the laser, which I have mentioned on the prior video, you can time yourself to provide a weapon action in order to counter this. Like I said before, panicking is not the most ideal choice. As long as you recognize it, it simply becomes a matter of just when you're going to weapon action in order to reap the counter damage. In order to provide you with just a little bit of a reminder, just as long as you get yourself in position, make sure you pay attention to the silhouette of the laser that's getting beamed on at you. Once you see that first ray of light come in, I pretty much have weapon action ready so that by the time you're able to weapon action, you'll be able to counter appropriately and do damage. Since I mentioned on the prior video that usually these kind of laser bullets come in at pairs, you don't have to worry about countering the second one because during the duration of the time that you're in counter, you will be invincible. So make sure you take advantage of that, counter the first bullet, and then continue doing more damage. Of course, as previously mentioned on the prior video, once the circus laser finishes, Sodam will impart 2 laser bullets, and once that 2 laser bullets, he will raise his hand, statistically more likely than not, so that he spawns 2 more lasers. When he spawns 2 more lasers, you just counter them appropriately, and usually in this case, I either, if he's in the corner, I reposition Sodam so that he faces his back towards the wall in order for minimal backtracking of Sodam, where I can provide myself with more DPS and not have to worry about chasing Sodam as often as I can. Usually fighter chasing enemies is not the most ideal when it comes to the most DPS output. So after Sodam does the slow walk up, circus lasers, 2 bullets, raise hand, and followed by another 2 bullets, Sodam will typically face towards you and try to do a slam down with an X-ray ground effect, which does damage. If you are a fighter and you are really close to Sodam with aggro, the weird thing about this is that if Sodam is facing you and he starts enabling this attack, he has a weird habit of turning a little bit away and doing the slam down. This is just a weird thing where sometimes when you're damaging, your hitbox extends forward, which makes Sodam recognize your hurt box as your character, which it can extend either in front of him or even behind or centrally to Sodam, which makes the AI think that they have to reposition and try to do a slam down in order to hit you. Of course, when Sodam does the slam down, you can remedy it by slightly forcing Sodam to turn towards you so that it can turn towards a direction where they could try to hit you and be much more central towards you. This does not work when you are directly in front of him, where you can suddenly see Sodam doing weird things like turning around like a spinaroo and then do the slam down. This is the slam down that you'll be much more familiar with, where despite you being very close to him, Sodam will just turn on and just do a slam down. Another cool thing to note, when Sodam does a slam down towards you, like I have mentioned before, if you're close enough, you won't have to deal with Sodam actually hurting you. So you can just not be afraid, just continue damaging when you can, and just stay close to him. Sometimes after the slam down, Sodam can either do another slam down just for the heck of it, or he can just follow up with another move such as this one, which is basically a gravitational pull into an explosion. Once this occurs, I typically just tap Tornado Dance. You don't have to charge it, and make sure I get close to Sodam while the pull effect is on you, so that you can reposition yourself close to Sodam and allow the counter to be able to be hit on Sodam's core. Soon after that, Sodam can either do that jump attack where he retreats all the way back, or he can do a double swipe. Depending on either or, it is usually based on reaction, but sometimes you can counter should you wish, or just simply dodge at the right time and start chasing him should he move all the way back. As I mentioned earlier, when Sodam does a double swipe or a jump attack, Sodam's body tends to creep backwards, which means as a fighter, you have to expend some time to reposition. Even though you might not be able to do as much damage at this particular portion, just make sure that you're able to at least be able to chase him down to provide some DPS. Just as a reminder, when Sodam just does a jump attack like this, he will spawn 2 bullets, so feel free to use Deadly Circle, or if you're comfortable with it, you can just time yourself so that you can do a bullet counter followed by whatever other move Sodam can do. Sometimes Sodam will expand its wings just like this. When that occurs, Sodam sends out tracker bullets that aims towards you and just does a little bit of damage. As a up and front fighter, you don't really have to worry about this because those bullets will not track if you're too close to the body. It will track towards other people who are mid-range and long distance as well. Do note that those are counterable as well if you're not a fighter main, but just as food for thought. When Sodam does this particular double swipe, I sometimes try not to go for double counter because by the time Sodam backs out, the second counter will not come out. Usually after the first counter, I either use Rumbling Moon or I immediately use Tornado Dance in anticipation that Sodam is going to do a jump attack that veers his body all the way back. That is just my way of tackling this particular scenario, because it is just as a reminder that fighter needs to be up close to do a lot of DPS. I just sometimes prepare for this instance. Sometimes Sodam will do that reach-in grab, where that is usually in the instance of when Sodam has aggro on someone else that is usually mid-range distance. Just pay attention to the aggro marker, which is usually on the name on the top left. On the bottom right part of that little box, there's a little red square with a little monster figure that usually tells you if you have aggro or not. If someone is mid-range and they have aggro, sometimes you will just see that particular attack. Sometimes Sodam will be an absolute schmuck and teleport all the way back right there while he's raising his flaccid axe. As I mentioned on the previous video regarding the basics of Super Sodam, you can simply just position yourself and just counter appropriately, or just run all the way to the sidelines where the floor was not highlighted just to stay safe. I tend to stay as north as possible so that by the time Sodam returns, I can immediately start doing attacks right here. Just as a quick reminder as well, if Sodam is all the way towards the wall like this, make sure you are very ready that Sodam does not accidentally sneak you in with a slow walk like this. Just make sure that since the condition is just right, where Sodam is all the way at the edge, Sodam's AI is designed where he wants to sort of be in the center part of the stage and from there start doing its attack. Sort of like a reset neutral zone that the developers sort of coded him into. So just be mindful of that sudden drop down when you are up close fighting Sodam. There are some instances where Sodam will do this particular scream attack. This scream attack, I personally find it rather rare when the person who has aggro is right in front of Sodam. I tend to find this occur more often when the person who has aggro are mostly in the mid-range distance. Of course, that does not mean that you will never ever see that attack. It's just that that's a particular rotation of a move that I don't see quite often. Still handy to recognize. Now we will talk about the particular instance when Sodam is about to do the 50 billion bullets attack. A lot of people will be extremely scared, rightfully so, whenever they encounter this particular move, but don't fret. I'll guide you my step-by-step logic when tackling this particular attack. The case might be a little bit different depending on what kind of class you play, but from a fighter luster's perspective, it can be rather simplistic once you understand fully what's going on. So to break it down for you, Sodam will float right around this. I typically sneak in a scissor slash or even an acro, just one, maybe two very quick ones. And once that occurs, that is when I immediately swap to twin daggers in order for me to chase all the way up. Remember, as I mentioned earlier in this video, where your movement input after you do the raging vaults from twin daggers, it affects where your body ends as you climb up. Since I'm pressing forward in this occasion, my body will slightly creep up in height, which gives me enough time to swap to DS and level my height so that I could try to hit him in the center. That's the approximate height that I usually go for, and once that occurs, I try to wait for the bullets to come through. You'll be able to tell about the bullet silhouettes coming through when you start seeing several lines targeted at you. Since this is a 50 million bullet target, you can easily recognize them. So the whole rule of thumb is I only use either normal attacks or illusion flurry so that I can immediately counter the moment I start seeing the bullet and the silhouettes that are tracked upon me. So as I'm mid PA or as I'm doing my normal or illusion flurry, the moment I see those lines, that is where on reaction, I immediately press weapon action in order to get my first counter. After the first counter, you have just enough trails of those lasers in order for you to tap weapon action again for a second counter as well. Just make sure that you try not to mash spam, because if you mash spam, it's, mash spam could probably work, provided that you have the slow fighter rings. After you finish 2 sets of counters, that is where you start dropping down, and as you're dropping down, you have to make sure that you swap to your knuckles. You have to be very mindful that you cannot, under any circumstances, utilize a movement WASD or control stick in order for your ending action of move does not linger with the DS. Sometimes lingering prevents you from swapping weapons properly, which also prevents you from doing things with a different weapon after you swap it. It could be server related, ping related, it could be a connection related as well. So try to avoid using the movement. So knowing that, we will drop down after swapping knuckles, and right before I land, that's where I use Fatal Knockout. The Fatal Knockout, as I mentioned way earlier in this video, is that if you time your Fatal Knockout, you'll be able to get a counter, which makes the Fatal Knockout action come a lot quicker, and also you are invincible throughout the entirety of the time for Fatal Knockout. This is what it looks like from start to finish. Usually after the 50 multi-billion lasers, after the Fatal Knockout, I tend to dodge back because most of the time Sodam slowly starts doing this walk-up thing again. So this is just in a statistical analysis that I tend to find. This does not mean that this is a guarantee. As I mentioned before, not all attacks that Sodam do will be part of some formula. Sometimes Sodam will do something different, even if statistics play into your hand. So make sure you react to this and make sure that you are always ready for all of these attacks, no matter what. Once you do sufficient enough damage, Sodam will transform into its final form, which is, in this case, will be the last phase. This is where a lot of the attacks usually come out just a little bit quicker than the 12-man Sodam that you're normally accustomed to, as well as Def 100. So make sure that you are aware of this while you anticipate your attacks. Once this occurs, usually I'm here on the northwest side, right behind the pool, and I use my gun slash to start charging. From here, I would anticipate one of two moves that Sodam usually does in this mid-distance form. Sodam will either lay his right hand down by the edge of that stage and he uses his left hand to slam the right side of the stage or the east side of the stage. Knowing that, since his right hand will be on the side, I would get my bullet ready and I would shoot in order to reach max rewards. Sometimes Sodam will simply not do that. As I mentioned about the 50-50, this is where Sodam uses the left hand slam down on the east side. After the first set right here, in the case of the left hand slam down, I immediately charge all the way. Sometimes I would use Chaos Riser like so in order to provide extra damage to the gilding breakdown so that once both hands and the gildings, which is the gold parts, are broken, you'll be able to receive a buff depending on which character you talked at right before phase 2. Otherwise, I would just do my usual damage rotation towards the palm of the hand. One thing to note, once the left hand is down like so, make sure that you try to chase towards the palm of the hand so that you can avoid some of the attacks that Sodam does. It could be either the icicles or the fireballs, as you see right up there, which can target you. So as long as you're close to the palm of the hand and not towards the edge of the fingers, you should be fine from those. After that is satisfied, continue damaging it from here. As I mentioned, get Tornado ready in order for you to reposition, but I try to react to it and just try to damage as much as I can. So on this mid-distance phase, on the last part or the last phase, he would either use the left hand slam down or right hand fist down. You can immediately tell what kind of right hand slam down he's going to do based on what lingers after his slam down. If there is no rocks in an X-ray format shows up, then this particular wrist smackdown on the floor is a very special particular slam down where you're able to try to get a double counter. In this occasion, I did not get it, but that is based on how quickly you press your weapon action and timing it properly. In this case, I will show you what you should anticipate if you're able to get the double counter. So there is another particular move that Sodam does when you're at mid-distance situation like this. Aside from the left hand slam down, which we already talked about, the right hand wrist smackdown, which we already talked about, especially the one that does not have the rock formation, which gives you the opportunity to do a double counter after the first smackdown. And the other variant is this particular smackdown where it spawns these rock formations. There is no secondary additional counter that you can do after the third and final smackdown, but it should still be worth noting. Usually, once you get into the last phase here, after Sodam does 3 attacks, unless you have done crazy amounts of damage, Sodam will start extending the Kun pool a little bit further south. Once this occurs, I immediately swap to my dual blades and start manual aiming, shooting the hand trajectory so I can maintain voltage and also be able to get a perpetual limit break. So having dual blades definitely helps. Once you're all the way at the far extended version or the far side version, this is where Sodam does 2 attacks. One is where he uses the right hand slam down with his palm of his hands, in which this case we shall see right here. Very benign, relatively straightforward, nothing too crazy about this. The other version is Sodam will try to do this reach in for the left hand, which you can also anticipate this easily by just countering. Do note that if you are up close, you can try to get a nice timed counter going on, but if you're far away from the hand, you might anticipate some tornado spawning in your location, so be mindful about that. After a couple attacks that Sodam does, provided you do enough damage, you'll be able to knock Sodam back like this. Once that occurs, I immediately start getting my rotations ready, and I stay away from the center because statistically, right after this occurs, Sodam will do a massive Kun blast. So whoever stands at the center, you are going to die. Unless you have an extra life or you have PB where you can just hold it and try to survive. So after the Kun blast, Sodam will go back to its usual rotations as I mentioned earlier. Left hand with the palm slam down versus the right hand with 2 variations of fist smackdown. Be mindful that sometimes at this point you might be able to break all the gilding, so on reaction have your dual blades ready in order to upkeep your voltage. Once you do enough sufficient damage, you will push Sodam all the way to the back, in which this case it's going to be a shorter Kun pool or short distance rotations. Once Sodam does short distance rotations, he's going to do a couple of things. The movesets are going to be different. The slam downs with his palm of his hand will not be on the left, but instead will be on the right hand with 2 particular variations. And the left hand will do a fist smackdown with 2 variations. In this case, the right hand slam down, he emits this ominous, whatever gaseous white-black thing. This thing is pretty much the indicator to let you know that as you do your attack, as the hand pulls over, Sodam is going to start damaging anyone who's within that particular area, which I think it's the entire stage, if I'm not mistaken. I haven't really tested this while I'm on the opposite side of the universe, but it's always handy to know that towards the end, as the hand starts going up, you can have your weapon action ready in order to counter it. If you want to avoid taking damage, you can charge Deadly Circle, and as the hand goes up, you can counter without risking yourself from damaging and still be able to get a counter hitting at the tip of his hand as it goes up. The other variation of the right hand slam down is when there is no white and black gooey thing emitting from the hand. In this case, you can just be rest assured, use your DPS rotation as there won't be a counter situation as the hand goes up. This is one of the left-hand variations of the smackdown. In this case, just make sure that you have your counters ready and just be prepared for the counters. Also, as a reminder, do not forget that after 4, 5, or 6, statistically I find around after the first Kun Blast, after 5 attacks that someone does, including the pushback, he tends to do another Kun Blast. So during the rotations while you're doing the attacks, make sure to have tornado ready as always, just in case if you have to reposition yourself as far away from the center as possible in order to not get caught into it. Once you do sufficient damage, you will push Sodam all the way to the north side back right here. This is the final given, and this is where you try to do as much damage as possible. Make sure that you're mindful of the particular counter situation right here, which is easily denoted by Sodam kind of charging and gathering energy towards the chest and then unleashing it. Once you see the unleash or right before the unleash, just make sure you have weapon action ready so that you can stay safe. You can of course also use Deadly Circle or Baleful Circle should you wish. And after you do sufficient enough damage, then comes the time where you finally kill Sodam. Sometimes you might not get the final pushback, but based on damage, you might be able to clear Sodam just like so. Usually this is damage dependent. Well, there you have it. I believe I have mentioned the majority of things related to Fighter Luster and what to do as a Fighter Luster and anticipate for Super Sodam. I hope this may provide enough information to guide you into your success challenging Super Sodam. I wish you all nothing but the best. If you have any questions, just feel free to ask. And don't worry about failing this quest. It takes a bit of adjustment, practice, and proficiency in order for you to clear this quest consistently and also provide DPS alongside it. Don't worry about dying during this quest, as it is a good day to die. Every death counts as an experience for you and a reminder of what you can improve. In due time, I believe everyone can sufficiently master this quest and additionally be able to help others clear for the first time. As always, I hope you enjoyed this long ass video brought to you by your neighborhood chicken man.